Well, how is everybody this morning? Good, good, all right. Oh, okay.
We're having a contest to see who's more country.
Oh, well, my wife would probably tell you I'm more country than anybody.
I don't know, some of us in here are pretty country.
I grew up in Fort Worth, lived here all my life. That's about as country as you can
That's where Herb, he got on the farm outside of Hamilton.
get. Oh,
Well, the town I grew up in, on the edge of town, it says population 1,714. But what they don't tell you is 700 of those are inmates in the prison.
oh.
So the population of town is right at 1,000.
Okay.
And most of those work at the prison.
Okay, all right. Well, don't forget to pick up a prayer band for one of the kiddos that's going to camp. And Vacation Bible School starts on the 10th and runs through the 14th for ages 4 through 5th grade from 9:30 till noon. And if you want an opportunity to work in VBS, I'm sure there's still a place to work. And I'm extending a request. I'm going to be cooking on the last day of VBS, probably 200 plus hot dogs.
I think David helped you last year, didn't he?
I did.
Yeah,
That was fun.
Yeah.
I'm not
so
gonna be here this year.
Oh, you're not gonna be
I'm
here.
sorry.
anybody that wants to volunteer to help me cook hot dogs, I'm in for that. Oh, okay. Really, the announcements that I went over last week, ditto. Okay. So, Stu didn't put out any new ones, so. Prayer requests.
Well, let me just add one thing before we do the prayer request.
Okay.
We are committed to the last Wednesday in July to serve snacks to the youth on the last Wednesday of July. I don't know the date of that one.
The 21st.
That's the last. Is that the last of July?
Right, I think that's,
26.
oh, the 26th.
Wednesday night.
Yes,
Actually, it's
Yes.
it's their supper.
it's their supper.
Yeah, right.
I'm thinking maybe hot dogs. Well, Tommy's a great cook.
He's already got practice.
Well, we're probably looking at between around 20, 25.
Because you could do, you can do the hot dog in the buns in the crock pot.
Yes, I think that would probably be the easiest thing to do. Yeah. Will you be here on that?
We'll be back.
Like on Wednesday? Good.
We'll be back on the 21st.
Okay.
Okay. Prayer request. Yes, Lana.
So I have two members that are driving me crazy. We have two cousins this week, and neither one of them can get their jobs together. Just pray that they will miraculously get their stuff together so we can get these people close.
Okay.
It's not random, but for my people, it's not random.
We need to pray for the youth from our campus and the campus that they'll have a safe trip.
Right.
They're going pretty far distance Corpus Christi. Pray they'll have a great week at camp. Now, Will knows where this place is.
So I have a praise. My daughter has been working Sunday through Thursday for several years now, has accepted a teaching position at Farmers Branch Elementary. So she'll be teaching first grade, and that will be so much better for her schedule than the ability to teach. So I'm very.
Great.
So now I pray she passed, but she's got to get that temporary certification. So she's got to get through all those modules in the next few weeks. So pray she gets through those.
All right. Okay. Well, that's great. Great. All right. Well, Mr. Song Leader.
Everybody can find a hymnal in the chair around you. Let's turn to number 332. Does this, well, I'll let you find it first. I was going to ask, does this song look familiar to anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, so some have sung it, okay. It's been a while since I've sung it, but I like it and we'll give it a go. Number 332. We'll let our piano player come in first. Number 332. Without him I could do nothing. Without him I surely fail. Without him I would be drifting like a ship without Jesus. Oh, Jesus, do you know him today? Do not turn him away. Oh, Jesus, oh, Jesus, without him I would be. Without him I would be dying. Without him I'd be enslaved. Without him I would be hopeless. But with Jesus, thank God, I'm saved. Jesus, oh Jesus, do you know him today? If I turn him away, oh Jesus, oh Jesus, without him, how long I would be. Thank y'all so much.
I know it's supposed to be the one that I was over there. Nursing home, they requested that.
Wow. Rather well.
Which way my notes open. Good to see. I've got a good group here today. Yeah, everybody's off their trips and well and back together. Glad to have my little wifey here for the first time in a while. You know, we're in Jeremiah, as I know all of you know. I always liked Jeremiah for the fact that, to me, Jeremiah is one of the most realistic prophets in a sense that he's really human. I mean, you know, he really questions. Now, he's not the only one that questions about what God's doing and what's going on and how God is doing it. he knows the kind of the bottom line, but boy, he doesn't understand really kind of what's going on with God. In in a technical wedding vows or traditional wedding vows, it always says, "Will you, forsaking all others, be faithful as long as you both shall live?" And Jeremiah helps remind us, and as you go through both the Old and New Testaments, you'll find that God calls for that same kind of exclusive relationship as the wedding vows. He wants us not really to put him first. He really wants us to put him as only. There's a difference there. Jeremiah, really, this lesson goes from the first or the text for it goes from Jeremiah 1 all the way through the end of Jeremiah 17. So we got 7 chapters that kind of do, but they only pause on this one chapter in Jeremiah 12. And I thought again about having people read and stuff, but I just thought, I'm just going to read the verses and take off through them. And if you've got a Bible or you got your quarterly there, well, you can kind of follow on. The first section is this whole first section, a couple of sections, is all Jeremiah talking to God, and he's asking. I think he's kind of like asking for relief. Things have been tough, he thinks. The answer he's going to get is not one he was hoping for. And, that's kind of true a lot of times in life. We pray and we ask God for certain things, and quite often the answer we get is not what we were hoping for, not what we wished there would be. But Jeremiah has his head on right so far as who God is. If you look at verse 1, he says, "Righteous are you, O Lord." He knows God's righteous. Everything that God does is right and righteous and holy. But that doesn't mean Jeremiah understands it, no more than we do often. He says, "When I complain to you, right and righteous are you, O Lord, when I complain to you, yet." All those transition little things, the yet and but and however's, pay attention to those as you read, because they're kind of important. "Yet I would plead my case." He's saying, I'd like to stand in court before you and plead my case. Why does the way of the wicked prosper and all the treacherous thrive? I think he would agree that he was righteous and sought God and wanted to do God's will, yet he was suffering. And he looks around town and sees all of these rich cats that are cheating, lying, stealing, having mistresses, worshiping Baal, and all of these things that were evil before God. And yet they just seem to keep on prospering over and over again. And look at second verse. He said, "You plant them, and they take root, and they grow and produce fruit. You are near in their mouths and far from their hearts." He said they're going through all of the ceremony. They had the temple right there in Jerusalem, and they still would offer sacrifices. The priests would do all the rituals and everything. And even these wealthy, wicked, treacherous people often would do the same things. But then what would they do? They would lie, cheat, steal, commit adultery, go down to the valley of Hinnom and sacrifice to Baal. And Jeremiah says, I'm trying to do everything right, and I'm catching it in the neck. And these guys are doing everything that's wrong, and yet they're living a good life. you ever wondered to God about what's happening and why it's happening to you or yours? He said, and he's kind of blaming it on God. He says, you plant them and they take root. What's going on? And he says down in verse 3, he says, but you, Lord, you know me. That know me was not just, you don't just know about me. You know me down deep, my heart, my life, my being. You know me. You see me and test my heart toward you. And then he just kind of loses all patience. He says, pull them out like sheep for the slaughter. You know, when a shepherd had a sheep that was just kind of raggly tag and never did well and never did have good fur on it or something, they would try to fatten them up as best they could. And the first time they had a chance, they'd sell it for the market. That sheep would be culled out of the herd. You don't want a straggly sheep that is sickly all the time and doesn't do well. That's not a sheep you want to keep in your herd. You want the best to keep in your herd. And so he's saying, do them just like those sheep that are no good. Send them to the market, let them cut their throats and bleed them out and skin them and sell them. I mean, Jeremiah's just kind of lost patience with them. Set them apart for the day of slaughter. Now, he's ready for God's judgment to come. He's been telling the people there that God's judgment was going to come, and Jeremiah has had it up to here. Literally, he's ready. He said, how long? Look at verse 4. How long will the land mourn and the grass of every field wither? For the evil of those who dwell in it, the beast and the birds are swept away, because they said he'll not see our latter end. You know, when the people started turning away from God, when they started doing evil things, one of the judgments that God would send a lot of times was drought on the land. This was an agricultural society. They were either trying to grow grain or they were trying to shepherd the sheep and the goats and whatever animals they might have. And when there was a drought, there was no grass. You remember over in what was the other Old Testament prophet that was up in Israel? Israel doesn't exist anymore, by the way. At the time Jeremiah is here, Israel has already been annihilated and carried off into captivity. They're gone. But one of their last prophets up there met the king Ahab. Ahab and a servant was out looking for grass. They were trying to keep the last horses alive in his kingdom. And that's what Jeremiah here is talking about. He says, how long will the land mourn and the grass of every field wither? He said, even the beast and the birds that dwell in the fields, they're swept away. They're no more. They're just dying. You find their skeletons here and there. And it's all, he says, because they said, and he's talking about these wicked, evil, prosperous, treacherous people. He says, they're saying he will not see our latter end. You see, I think a lot of those rich people felt about like they worshiped Baal. They kind of equated maybe God at this point of history as being kind of like Baal. He sees what's happening in his temple because that's where he dwells. But when we go away, he doesn't see. You know, when you go down to Hinnon and you worship Baal, you know, that Baal sees that. He sees the sacrifices we give him and all, and maybe he can help us to know what's right and prosper. And that's the same way they were treating God. But outside of that, God won't see what we're doing. You know, I think sometimes we have people today that kind of forget that God sees everything. God knows everything we ever did, even what we've thought about doing. And we're either convicted or too chicken to do it. So God decides to answer Jeremiah. And starting there in verse 5 and following, he says, It's not an answer that Jeremiah was hoping for. He says, hey, if you've raced with men on foot and they worried you, how will you compete with horses? God's telling him, look, you've been dealing with men and racing with men, trying to keep ahead of them or catch them up and get them to change their ways. And if you are tired and weary and feel like you're being persecuted, how are you going to keep up with the horses? What? I'm racing with men, and you say now I'm going to have to race with horses. I don't know about you, but I couldn't outrun a horse about 10 feet. It takes a horse about 10 feet to get started, and that's about 10 or 12 feet, he's going to pass me by, and that's going to be the end of it as far as a race was concerned. He said, if they've worried you, how will you compete with horses? And if in a safe land, I think Jeremiah would kind of question that. But comparatively, God's telling Jeremiah that comparatively to what is coming in the future, you're dwelling in a safe land. You know, what are you going to do in the thickets of Jordan? The thickets of Jordan would be those places around down through the Jordan River Valley that were so rough and so overgrown with brush and trees and stuff. And that's where the lions and the bears and the varmints all hung out. And he says, if right now you're in comparatively a safe land, how are you going to handle it when you're down in the thicket of things with all of the creatures that would like to kill you, or even your brothers? Look at verse 6. For even your brothers in the house of your father, even they've dealt treacherously with you. A lot of people think that probably Jeremiah was from a pretty well-known priestly family in Jerusalem. They weren't down the rung very far below the king and the hierarchy of the country. And he's saying, for even your brothers in the house of your father, they've dealt treacherously with you. And he says they are in full cry after you. They're like a pack of hound dogs treeing a raccoon. I don't know if any of you ever gone out hunting with hound dogs and chasing raccoons. I have, and maybe you've seen on TV, there's one program that Darlene and I watch that has a lot of different characters, and one of them is a guy that runs the mountain lions out of the lowlands when they come down where the ranchers are and where the farms are, and the mountain lions get hungry. They come down the mountain looking for easy meals, and he has a pack of dogs, and I'm sure for a fee they pay him, but he chases those mountain lions back up in the mountains high enough that they won't be back down to bother the cattle much anymore. And when his dogs get after the mountain lions, you can hear them from a long ways off. And he says, you know, that's about like even your family, they're in full cry after you. And he says, don't believe them, even though they speak friendly words to you. He says, beware of them. They're going to say, oh yeah, Jeremiah, just forget all of that. Come on home and you know, why don't you just be nice? Quit all this harsh stuff. And we'll welcome you and all this. But he said, don't you believe them? I think one of the things that, you know, we have to watch out for is kind of gauging our faithfulness to God according to what others say. There's probably the worst fights and splits in churches that you ever run into is where people start compromising and they start going along with folks in the church who are not doing things like they know in their heart need to be done, and they just, to keep the peace, they just, until it finally explodes. And then there's no peace for anybody. I had a friend that was pastoral ministers department, state of Georgia, and one of his expertise is helping to settle church fights. And he wrote a lot of materials and trained a lot of men within the convention to help do it. And he said, the people just forget everything, and all they can do is remember the wrongs that they think the other party did. There's nothing right anymore. And maybe some of you have been through a church split or so in your history, but it's not a pretty thing. And people often don't end up treating each other like Christians ought to treat each other. There's no love shown quite often. And we don't have to get back into our sermon, but you can just remember, but God is love. And one of the things that I'd say about this fact that God is love and God is in it, you can't really love others without having God in your life. That's just not in your worldly, earthly nature. Now, there's some people that are friendlier, but the love, look at there, verse 8 and 9. God speaking to Jeremiah says, my heritage has become to me like a lion in the forest. She's lifted up her voice against me, and therefore I hate her. My heritage. What's his heritage? He promised Abraham that he would become a nation that was more numerous than the stars, more numerous than the sands, grains of sand on the beach. And Isaac and Jacob becomes Israel, and they end up, in slavery, and God sends Moses and brings him out through a lot of great miracles and all of this. And it's his people that he selected was considered his heritage, his possession that was precious in his eyes. But he said, they've become to me like a lion in the forest, and she's lifted up her voice against me, therefore I hate her. The people were not worshiping God. Some, they were going to the temple and going through the ceremonies and stuff. They were singing the praise songs and listening to the message and complimenting the preacher. But as Jeremiah started off of, their words are there, but their heart isn't. And therefore, he said, my heritage has become to me like a lion. Anybody heard in one of these wildlife movies of Africa and stuff, you heard the lions roaring at night? And they say you can hear it for miles, literally miles. I'm not sure altogether what the roaring's about. One of them, I think, is probably he's just letting everybody know that this is his territory. And if you're not supposed to be there, you better clear out. But whatever it was, they were roaring that they're the boss, not God. And therefore I hate her. It says, my heritage is like a hyena's lyre. Mark, what does that hyena's lyre allude to?
They're 10. That's there.
And the commentary that I had said it was a rare kind of a example or allusion, but it went on to say something about it had to do with salvation. I think they were trying to make a whole different lesson out of something that wasn't there. I think a hyena is a scavenger. They have some of the strongest jaws in the animal kingdom. I mean, they can crush bones in just a minute. If you've ever seen a pack of lions and some hyenas kind of tangle, the lions are very careful about hyenas. Now, a lion can kill a hyena, but he has to be very careful because if that hyena latches onto a leg or something, he'll crush it in a second. And a lion with a crushed leg is dead because it's not going to be able to heal. And even if he's the leader of the pack, some young lion's going to take him on while he's crippled and kill him. And so they really be careful of those hyenas. And a hyena's lair is where they're going to have their pups. And he says, you know, my heritage to me is like a hyena's lair. They've turned against me. They snap and bite and even would like to see me go away, destroyed. He said, are the birds of the prey a prey against her all around? The birds of prey, I guess he's talking about things like eagles and falcons and hawks and such. And he says, go assemble all the wild beasts and bring them to devour. I think he's probably saying when the Babylonians come, they're going to bring all these satellite nations that have sided with the Babylonians and are part of the Babylonian kingdom, and all these nations out of the east across the Jordan and up in the mountains of that east, the Amorites and the Hittites and all that bunch, they're all going to come too. And when they do, and the armies of Babylon get there and take Jerusalem finally, these folks are going to take part of the loot and all. So I think that's what he's talking about. He said, down in verse 10, he says, many shepherds have destroyed my vineyards. They've trampled down my portion. If you remember in the Old Testament, when God would, you know, that circular thing that happens in the Old Testament all the time, the people sin, God judges them, sends droughts and sends other nations against them to punish them. The people repent and God sends a judge, and the judge rules for 20, 30, 40 years even, and the people are all prosperous and doing well, and then they forget God and begin to sin again. It goes round and round like that. One of the things that would happen is these, and at least I know one instance in the Old Testament, it talks about how these nations that would bring judgment against Israel would bring all of their herds of animals, and they would run over and eat up everything. And they would do it during the harvest time because a lot of times people already had harvested, they've already got their grain in baskets and things and in storage. And when they came in raiding, they would haul all of that away. But not only that, like their vineyards, they'd have walls around and protect them from the animals. These folks would tear down the walls and let the animals come in and eat up the vineyards and destroy the vines and all of that. And that's the picture that he's talking about. But who are the shepherds? Who are the shepherds you think he's talking about?
The people are supposed to protect the first stuff.
Yeah, I think he's maybe talking about the royal family, the kings. He's also probably talking about the priest that should be telling the people the truth about God and warning them against their evil practices. But no, they're the ones that are going to the king and trying to put down Jeremiah and telling the king and all of them that, oh no, he's just, you know, a quack. Don't believe him. There's going to be peace. We have the temple of God. As long as it's here, we can't be overthrown. And, you know, he said, but many shepherds have destroyed my vineyards. They trampled down my portion. They've made my pleasant portion a desolate wilderness. Look at those verses right there, that word desolate. They've made my pleasant portion. When they first came into that land, what did God say about it? It's a land of milk and honey. Remember, they brought back those 40 that went in to spy out the land. They brought back a bunch of grapes that took 2 men to carry that one bunch of grapes. I got some grapevines, but I've never had a clump of grapes. It's bigger than my hand, really. But But he said, they've made my pleasant portion a desolate wilderness. The pleasant portion too could also be alluding to his people that worshiped him and held him as holy and obeyed his law and followed his prophets and did what was right in God's eyes. But they've made it, instead of being a prosperous land, a land of milk and honey, a land where God was blessing them, they've made it a desolate wilderness. They've made it a desolation. Desolate, it mourns to me. The whole land is made desolate. If you start talking about repetitive words and how important that makes them, well, look here, you got a desolate wilderness, have made it a desolation, desolate, it mourns me, the whole land is made desolate. I think he's picturing something where there's nothing left. And that third time the Babylonians come down, it was kind of like 3 strikes and you're out. And they just destroyed everything. For the next 40 years, Jerusalem up on that hill is full of briars and nothing. And the local people don't want to have anything to do with it because it's a place of death and desolation. And says, but no man lays it to heart. He sends the prophets, but the people just won't listen. No man lays it to heart. They trampled it down. They made it a desolation. They no longer worship God. They don't follow after it. And nobody feels guilty about it. Nobody thinks there's anything wrong with what they're doing. That's the way everybody's living. You ever had your kids to tell you, well, everybody's doing it? That's one of the great things that kids want to do. So, well, why can't I? Everybody's going, or everybody's doing it. Everybody has one. I'm the only one that's, I'm afraid I wasn't very sympathetic to my boys.
Kind of like your mother.
Hmm?
Your mother used to say, when they all decided to jump off the bridge, you jump off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty standard operation with most of our parents. I'm not sure what they do today. I've been watching some of, there's been a lot of stuff today about the effect that all the social media and stuff is having on our kids, and I'm hearing more and more about parents that are making their kids leave their cell phones downstairs or in a place. They won't allow them to take them up to their bedrooms. And I think that's really probably pretty good. But I'd be careful. I maybe put an alarm on that drawer where the cell phones are because some of them will sneak down. Been there, done that. Yeah. He says they've sown wheat and they've reaped thorns. Remember, I think Jesus told a parable about the man that sowed his fields with the good grain and prepared it all really nice. And his enemy came in the night and sowed briars and thorns into the fields. And when the grain came up and the briars came up too, the servants went to the Lord and said, Lord, do you want us to go out and pull up briars? And he says, no, let them all grow together. And then when we harvest, we'll get the good grain and those briars will be burnt. And I think that's, one of Jesus's kind of alluding to at the end time. And maybe this would apply into this lesson because at the end time, all those that Jeremiah was seeing that were so wicked and doing so many evil things and yet prospering and living the good life and having big prosperous looking families and all the wealth and the good food and everything. And Jeremiah's saying, Lord, come on, why don't you go ahead and bring judgment on these fat cows? And he says they've sown wheat, they've reaped thorns, they've tired themselves out, but they profit nothing. All of that stuff that they got in the end means nothing. Boy, in our society today, what are the signs of success to the general population? Huh? Possessions. You know, he who has the most toys wins. He who has the biggest house, the nicest cars, you know, goes on the grandest vacations, that does all of the, you know, has the clothes with the little symbols on them that people desire, or the tennis shoes that they can pay thousands of dollars for. I remember I have big feet and I grew fast. And so about every so many months, I ended up had to have another pair of shoes. I didn't get the latest of the greatest. I got those black and white old tennis shoes, you know what I mean? And I'm sure they were the cheapest that my mom could find because we didn't have much money. And she knew they weren't going to last. They weren't hardly going to get worn out before I needed another pair. So, you know, but after I got up into high school, I quit growing so much because I was already 6'4". So I used to stand in the basketball court and hold the basketball up, and there wasn't anybody in junior high school that could even jump and get it. Nowadays, though, these kids are growing bigger. Same school, 6'4", you're a point guard. Because they're 6'10s and better out there in this same school, and it's not much bigger than when I was there. At least last time I was down that direction. In fact, it may be smaller even now. They got a lot of industry that's kind of blown the place up. He said they should be ashamed of their harvest because of the fierce anger of the Lord. That's kind of the end pronouncement. They shall be ashamed of their harvest because of the fierce anger of the Lord. When they realize what their harvest really was, when judgment finally falls, they're going to know Jeremiah was right. They're going to know that God's judgment has fallen, but it's going to be too late. And they're going to go into bondage 40 years. Just like 40 years in the wilderness, they spent, I guess it was 70 years they ended up in bondage to Babylon. And then Persia comes along, and Cyrus lets them start coming back. I just had the end statement that kind of was the end in my quarterly lesson, but I kind of rewrote it. I said, God expects his people to be faithful to him alone. All of our priorities in life, we must view in light of our relationship with God. Our loyalty to him must take precedent above everything else. And our relationship with the Lord is the one that is the basis for all of our other relationships. And I think that's the message of Jeremiah. God didn't give Jeremiah the relief he sought. And you may have found yourself in the same boat before, and we may find ourselves in the same boat in the coming future. But God, just like Jeremiah starts off, God is righteous. And he is going to judge. And it's going to be a real day. But when that day dawns and he comes, some of those that rejected him and kept rejecting him are going to start saying, oh, Lord, you know, I realize I've made a mistake, and it's going to be too late. Too late. And that's the same thing with these poor people there in Jerusalem, those surrounding towns, you know, that kept rejecting God, kept going after the idols and idol worship, and kept saying, "Oh, Jeremiah, why don't you go away? Be quiet. We don't want to hear that." Instead, they would hear their false prophets with messages that, as the Bible sometimes says, tickles men's ears. They got their ears tickled, but they got their tails kicked in a serious way. And when the Babylonians finally came, it was too late. Comments? Questions?
Well, when you mentioned the shirts with the little symbols on them, when I first saw it was in Bangkok, you go into a market and they'll have shirts, cheap shirts, and they have no markings on it. And they pull out two boxes. One is of the little symbols, you know, the horse or polo or whatever. And then the other one is for labels, Christian Dior. And within a minute, they can have whatever symbol you want on that shirt and whatever label you want on it. Now, the shirt's only gonna last about 3 washes.
Yeah.
But it's a cheap shirt. But you can have that false sense of you're the latest and greatest.
Yeah. When we went to the market over there, the guy that was with us told us, he said, well, there's 1 generation, 2 generation, and 3 generation shirts. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the 1 generation, you wear it and it shrinks and you pass it down to the younger generation. He said, in the 2 generation, you wear it and it shrinks, you pass it down and they wash it, it shrinks again, they have to pass it down. It's a 2 generation shirt. And the same thing with the 3 generation shirt.
Well, I mean, you know, when we lived in Taiwan, it was very common statement, they copyright was the rights of copy. Our kids, like they, I mean, our kids, they just go in and tell them what they really want.
Yeah.
Although they just work, yeah, I want.
Yeah, you can get the quality, but you're going to pay for it. And
And they don't always get the words right. You know, we had hard work t-shirts, you know, hard rock was real popular. And the word for rock and it was a similar, so you had hard work t-shirt for the hard rock.
Or instead of Rolex, it's L-O-L-E, Rolex. Because that's the way they said it, and they thought that was the way it said it. So you have Rolex.
yeah, I've got a little file someplace in my computer. There's a bunch of signs all around the world that are hilarious. People making signs in English, but they're translating it out of Chinese or Cambodian or, you know, something, and it's kind of funny. In fact, there was one on the gymnasium of our seminary in Baguio that I took a picture of, but I won't tell you what I thought was funny on it. Anyway, well, y'all all have a great week, and can say glad to see everybody here. Hope you all stay well and healthy and don't burn up. Stay hydrated if you're going to be outside, because it's finally good old Texas summers here. Let's close with a word of prayer. Lord, we do thank you for the day you've given us. We thank you for your message. We thank you for that prophet Jeremiah and his sidekick that wrote down everything that he preached and taught, everything that you said to him. That we just thank you for your word and the truths in it that we find, and how it even still, here thousands of years later, still applies, still is real, still should touch our hearts. Just help us to be faithful, help us to be true to you, and help us to be a good witness to others, even when folks sometimes are like Jeremiah, come get this brother your blessings. Bless our pastors and staff. Keep them all safe and well this week. Just ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
We had a construction sign in the Philippines going out for Faith Together. That, you'll see the sign slow, men working. This one said, slow men working.
And when we went by one day,
Right.